Hi everyone, it's Heidi again. All right, today we're reacting to an interesting topic for me, at least. This is called American versus German Christianity. I had no idea it was this different, by the Black Forest family. They're awesome, go subscribe to them. I grew up Mormon, and so I'm very interested to see what this has to say. I'm not part of that anymore as of about 3.5 years ago. It's still a little fresh, but I thought maybe I would have some insight into this. It's a topic that interests me a lot, so hopefully you think it's interesting too. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Come see me on Twitch if you haven't yet. We always talk about weird stuff over there. But otherwise, let's do this.
Despite businesses being closed on Sundays, a plethora of religious holidays, religion courses in public schools, and government-regulated church tax, yes, church tax, Germans are far less likely to attend church regularly and believe in God as described in the Bible than Americans. This was one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced after I moved here to Germany.
I wonder if the Black Forest family is religious. Maybe it will tell us, but, I feel like that would be maybe a little refreshing in a way for me, but at the same time, that it's kind of connected to state stuff and taxes is very, very weird to me. But I have heard how it kind of works in Denmark, how it's just kind of a traditional thing rather than a beliefs thing now. For people to, get baptized as a child, to have a like kind of confirmation type of thing when they're, was it 14? Something like that. But it's just kind of a tradition. It's just what you do there. And a lot of people don't actually believe in it, which is very interesting. I feel like here we take it a lot more seriously. Like if you're going to church, you believe in that shit. Like you're in it, right? It's kind of interesting. Maybe besides the Catholic Church, I feel like sometimes they're very casual. But anyway, we'll get more into it.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, my name's Ashton, and along with my husband Jonathan and our son Jack, we're the Black Forest family. Here on our channel, we talk a lot about the differences and similarities between life in the US and life here in Germany. But there's one very specific culture shock that I'm surprised more people aren't talking about. And that's religion. And listen, I'm not here to make a video advocating for one religion over another, nor am I using my platform to say that you should or shouldn't be religious. This isn't gonna be that kind of video. But rather, what I wanna talk to you about today is that the biggest culture shock I've experienced since moving to Germany is just how different a role that religion plays in everyday life, and the influence that Christianity specifically has on the contemporary zeitgeist, national and local politics, and everyday behaviors.
Okay,
now, I might not have grown up in the Bible Belt, but I do come from a very rural farming community with mandatory church on Sundays. A community where attending summer camp was synonymous with vacation Bible school. A community where we prayed on the 50-yard line at Saturday night football games, and a community where there was a little extra emphasis on the phrase, "one nation under God," during our daily Pledge of Allegiance.
Interesting. I didn't grow up in an area that kind of enforced stuff like that in public schools, but I was in a community where a lot of people did believe in that kind of stuff, and so it was just talked about a lot and things like that. But that would be interesting. I'm glad that I didn't experience something like that.
And again, I'm not here to pass judgment today. I'm not going to say whether or not those behaviors are right or wrong. But I will say that sometimes living in a...
They're so good. I'm really glad. I'm glad that they're going into this non-biased. I think that people who have been in religions in the past or have had, experiences like that can get a little bit bitter about it or a little judgmental about it or things like that. So good for them. Good for them. I'm going to try my best too.
In America feels like you're living in a bubble. And I really had no idea just how unusual our religious behaviors seem to many Europeans.
We see those all the time.
Even those right here in southern Germany, which is arguably the most religious region in this country. So in today's video, we're going to explore just that, religion, specifically Christianity, and just how different the practicing habits are between the United States and Germany. So, let's go ahead and dive right in. Like I said earlier, sometimes living in the United States does kind of feel like you're living in a bubble, but that's honestly applicable to most things in life. Geographically, we're a huge country, so it's unsurprising that even today, an estimated 40% of American adults have never left the United States, with 11% never even leaving the state in which they were born.
That is not me. No, we are going to Europe this summer. We just booked our flights, so I'm very excited. But yeah, the United States is huge. It's just a lot of land and a lot of differences too, it's very interesting. So I do find that a lot of people, including myself, are like, oh, I'll just visit another part of the US. It will be like a completely new area, new experience. And yeah, that is true. So,
but it goes even further than that. American media and American education tends to be pretty inward looking. We spend a heck of a lot of time talking about society and cultures within our borders, but not a whole heck of a lot of time talking about what happens outside of them.
That is true.
In fact, a reported 68% of Americans can't even identify the leader of our neighbor to the north in Canada. And ultimately, when it comes to things like religion, as an American, I can personally testify to the fact that we just honestly don't have a whole lot of understanding about what religious practices are like in other parts of the world. Growing up in the United States, I thought everybody in the world was as religious as we were in the US. I mean, of course, don't get me wrong, I thought different countries had different majorities and minorities of different religions, but generally speaking, the percent of the population that attended church weekly and would rank religion as being one of the most important pillars of their life and kind of a guiding tenement to their culture and community.
The foundation.
Well, I thought that was actually pretty similar. And to be fair, the United States does have a religious makeup that's broadly similar to that of many Western European countries. Most people on both sides of the Atlantic say that they're Christian, for example. And at the same time, a substantial share of both the US and Europe say that they are religiously unaffiliated. Roughly a quarter of American adults identify as nuns. 23%. Similar, actually, in fact, to those shares in Germany at 24% and the United Kingdom at 23%, and honestly, generally other Western European countries as well. But that's pretty much where the similarities end. And again, guys, this was one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced after I moved here to Germany. US adults, both Christian and unaffiliated, are considerably more religious than their European counterparts by a variety of other measures, according to an analysis of data from Pew Research Center's 2014 US Religious Landscape Study in the United States and a 2017 survey of Western Europeans. For instance, about 2/3 of US Christians pray daily, compared with just a median of 18% of Christians across 15 countries in Europe, including just 9% here in Germany. Almost 2/3, or 64% of Americans, also attend religious services at least monthly, compared to only 31% of Western Europeans and 24% here in Germany. Also, when looking at all adults, Americans are much more likely than Western Europeans to believe in God as described in the Bible. More than half of Americans, 56%, say that this is the case, according to another survey. This one conducted online by the Pew Research Center in 2017. But what's pretty astounding is that's twice the regional median in Western Europe, at just 27%. In Germany, and honestly in a lot of Western Europe, While the majority of people do identify as Christian and say that they were baptized, today many of them do not consider themselves to be religious. In Germany, around 22% of the population are church-attending Christians. But the largest majority, in fact, about half of the entire country, identify as non-practicing Christians. And don't get me wrong, more and more Americans have been identifying as non-practicing or outright non-religious, but it's not anywhere near the numbers currently exhibited in Germany.
That's really interesting because I feel like the people who came over to the US and kind of, the European America that founded America, I feel like they were very, very religious. A lot of the reasons why people moved to America was for religious reasons. I feel like we're just kind of behind Europe, where they've been doing their Christian thing for a long time, right? And, less and less people are claiming to believe it, going to church, things like that. And I feel like we're just catching up as well. I feel like a lot of things that America does is just something that Europe has, specific European countries at least, have already gone through, have already done. And we're just learning that ourselves now, just because we're a much newer country, right? So that's very interesting that, like, I can see us ending up like Germany or Denmark or someplace like that when it comes to religion, because I already see it happening. It's very, very interesting, especially with people, wanting to, everyone's forming their own opinions, which is very important, instead of just, listening to what somebody says and just saying that's the way it is. I think it's good for a developing country, so.
And learning about this difference in religious participation between the US and Germany, well, to be honest, it actually had me a little bit confused at first, because while Germans might not necessarily be as devout as Americans, living in Germany, especially here in southern Germany, what I can tell you is that from my personal experience, the church still has a very present role in everyday life. When I think back at why I had probably yet wrongly assumed that Germany and much of Europe was equally or even more religious than the United States, that idea was probably influenced by the architectural imagery that I was often shown of Europe. Like many Americans, it's hard to think of Europe without thinking of the grand cathedrals and the powerful role that religion had over many monarchies, shaping both historical events and modern-day geographic boundaries. And speaking of those grand cathedrals, those churches aren't actually the only properties that churches own here in Germany. In fact, the Christian churches in Germany are actually playing quite the game of Monopoly when it comes to real estate. Assessing the church's wealth is a tricky and tangled business due to their extensive land holdings and reparation payments they receive from the states. The two largest churches in Germany own at least 830,000 hectares of land, or 8,300 square kilometers, or 3,200 square miles. The churches themselves have disclosed tens of thousands of buildings that they each hold, in addition to at least 21,100 Protestant and 24,500 Catholic churches. And when examining buildings related to the church's roles in healthcare, education, and charitable work, the Catholic Church has at least 66,000 additional holdings, and the Protestant Church a further 50,000. They also lease an undisclosed number of properties to homeowners and businesses nationwide. And interestingly, we actually ran into this when we were first looking at properties to buy when house searching here in Germany. Inevitably, if we would find a house that was actually at a pretty reasonable price, well, that lower price listing for the house was almost always due to the fact that you were only buying the physical structure of the house, but not the land the house sits on. It's actually quite common in our area to find homes that are sitting on church lease holdings. It would say in the listing that the lease was guaranteed for like 99 years or something like that. But
Very
it's just
interesting.
really interesting because this doesn't happen in the United States. Like if I was buying a physical house, like with a foundation and plumbed into sewer lines and electrical, all of it. Like I would of course also buy the property that it sits on. But here in Germany, that's not necessarily the case. So in addition to a mortgage payment, you might also have to pay a monthly lease payment to the church to rent the land your house sits on. But
Now that is different. That is different. I know that we have HOAs and things like that where people are kind of taking care of the land and you own the house, but it's also you're kind of sharing it with a company because they're, making sure that the yard is taken care of and you have certain rules in that area, just things like that. Very interesting, but you definitely wouldn't pay rent to be on that land. Like, so I'm guessing here in Germany, if there was a situation like that, you'd be paying the mortgage for your own house and whatever loan you used for that, but then also a separate thing where you pay rent as well. Ew. That does not sound fun at all. So that's very fascinating. I haven't heard that combination before.
Organizations also receive money from the land they used to sit on. But religious organizations also receive money from the land they used to own as well. In Germany, they receive state funds to compensate for property losses dating back to the early 1800s when Napoleon upended the Holy Roman Empire. According to the broadcaster Deutschlandfunk, this amounted to nearly 500 million euros in 2017 and comes from taxpayers, whether they belong to the church or not. But honestly, beyond talking about land ownership or participation in charitable organizations, the other interesting reason I think that churches are actually so present in everyday life here in Germany is because of the seats that German churches are actually granted on advisory board committees across a variety of organizations. There, the churches sit alongside other interest groups such as conservationists, union leaders, and experts from a range of fields in the name of representing an important demographic. For example, the two largest churches have a voice on public broadcasting councils. And given the innumerable supervisory boards across Germany, to be honest, it's nearly impossible to estimate the amount of influence or the number of seats that churches actually hold on these supervisory boards throughout the country. But I also should be a little bit fair here and talk about the fact that churches in the United States, they do hold power and influence.
Right.
It just tends to be a heck of a lot more indirect. On a very basic level, people who belong to religious institutions in the United States have been statistically shown to be more civically engaged than their secular neighbors. They're more likely to serve on school boards, volunteer at charities, and join clubs. So it's somewhat unsurprising then that Congress has always been overwhelmingly Christian. And roughly 9 in 10 representatives, or 88% of the current Congress, including 99% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats, identify as Christian, according to a January 2021 analysis. And almost all US presidents, including current President Joe Biden, have been Christian. Interestingly, Biden is actually the second Catholic president after President John F. Kennedy. But that being said, the majority of presidents in US history have actually been either Presbyterian or Episcopalian, in case you're counting. And most US presidents have been sworn in with a Bible, and they traditionally seal their oath of office with the phrase,
"So help you God."
So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
So help you God.
So help me God.
And actually, I think this discussion of presidential candidates and Congress and the inner workings of government, it's a great transition to the last section of this video. As I mentioned,
I have a lot of thoughts. Just, it's very interesting. And I guess it makes sense that, because there are a lot of religious people here, especially in the founding of the USA, But I do know that we also are very, very, at least in a lot of parts, the parts of the US that I've lived in, there's a very, serious separation of church and state, is what we call it. It's usually not really accepted to have religion as part of laws or school systems, stuff like that. There are a lot of people fighting on that. People think that we should, keep under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, which I personally think the Pledge of Allegiance is a little bit weird to begin with, but there are people who think we should keep the under God in there, and then people who think we should take it out. And I don't know if we've come to a conclusion yet, just because there's so many different opinions, but it's very seriously looked at. It's looked at as, forcing someone's religion on our children, things like that. So kind of interesting. In my opinion, they're looking at the wrong issues. But it's very interesting to see that even though we have that opinion of, oh, we want to keep religion and state separate and government, we're still using things like that, where you have to swear in on the Bible, so help me God. It's weird. And maybe it's just a traditional thing. Maybe it is just more of a tradition. That's just what you say when you're sworn in. I don't know exactly what the thought is behind that, or if that will change here in the future. Seeing that it looks like most people in Congress and in the government are Christian, maybe not. But yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that before. But it makes me feel a little weird, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I'm just like, okay, we're doing that still? All right. Okay, good to know. Yeah, maybe religion's just a little bit weird for me.
Earlier, despite being more devout in their religious beliefs, the United States does have a constitutionally mandated separation of church and state. And sure, there are some things that kind of tend to make this line between government and religion seem a little blurry at times. After all, while the US Constitution does not mention God, nearly all state constitutions reference either God or the divine, according to a 2017 analysis. God also appears in the Declaration of Independence, the Pledge of Allegiance, and on our national currency. But there are still hard lines that the US government has put in place to not give preference to one religion over another, or to not meddle in the inner workings of religious institutions. For example, the Johnson Amendment limits political activity by religious organizations, and most Americans, around 70%, want churches and other houses of worship to stay out of politics. And the Supreme Court ruled all the way back in 1962 that it is unconstitutional for a teacher to lead a class in prayer at a public school. Now, don't get me wrong, while you're not probably going to see a public school teacher lead a class in prayer here in Germany, it is interesting to note that German public schools are allowed to have religion as part of their curriculum. In Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the German Constitution, it states that religious education shall be a part of the curriculum of public school. Now, you can opt out of this class here in Germany, but just the idea that religion would be offered as a standard public school course is something that would receive a huge amount of pushback in the United States. But it goes further than that. Here in Germany, especially in southern Germany, we have a lot more Christian religious holidays that are, in effect, government or bank holidays.
Okay, really quickly before she goes more into holidays, I think that's interesting. And I wonder if, classes in Germany, maybe instead of, because when we think about religious classes here in the US, we think, at least what I think is kind of more, how do we get into the religion rather than just learning about different religions or, about what other people believe. I think that kind of stuff is very interesting to learn. I think sometimes it's good to learn different mindsets in the world, different opinions, beliefs, things like that. So I wonder if maybe that's how they handle religious courses, is just learning about religions rather than learning about how we can be more devout in a religion or something like that. So maybe that's why it's more accepted in a public school setting, which I think that would be kind of cool here. It would be honestly really helpful. And this is the thing for me, because I am not part of one religion or any religion, I think it would be interesting to learn about what everyone is thinking. But with people who are devout in a religion, it is very common, at least in my experience, to try and not learn what other people think because it might sway you or it might, change your opinion. You want to stay firm in your beliefs, and that is something that is kind of dangerous at times. I think that broadening our knowledge of other things that people are doing, what they're thinking, experiences they've had, and not just our bubble of our one religion that we're clinging to, might be very, very beneficial for people, especially to just build their own opinions and thoughts about things and really think through things. So I wonder what is taught in those religion classes in Germany. Anyway, that was a tangent. Let's continue.
Where businesses close and schools shut down. Here in Baden-Württemberg, 9 of the 12 public holidays are Christian holidays. By contrast, only 1 out of the 11 federal holidays in the United States are directly related to Christianity.
That's interesting.
Now, of course, there are interesting exceptions. For one, as a festive season leading up to Shrove Tuesday or Mardi Gras and closing with Ash Wednesday, Carnival or Mardi Gras is actually a legal holiday in Louisiana and in Mobile and Baldwin counties in Alabama. So arguably, you might in some states find 1 or 2 more, but those examples are going to be limited. Mm-hmm. But the other interesting thing that seems to contradict the separation of church and state here in Germany is the notion of church tax, or Kirchensteuer. In the United States, tithing, or the giving of money as an offering to the church, is 100% handled by the individual churches. Mm-hmm. In the church that I grew up in, the offering basket was passed around immediately after communion, and there was the expectation that you should give 10% of your income, and this is based on the Old Testament passages in the Bible. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, according to the most recent data that Barna has published on giving in America, only 12% of evangelical Christians actually tithe. Many other surveys put the average total annual giving by a Christian at less than $1,000 a year. This means that many American Christians spend more on coffee, lawn care services, personal grooming, beauty products, or their hobbies than supporting the Lord's work. However, like I mentioned earlier, here in Germany, tithing is actually handled by the finance authorities in the form of church tax, or Kirchensteuer. How much you pay in church tax is going to vary according to your salary and where you live. Like other surcharge taxes, for instance, the solidarity surcharge, it's going to be based on the amount of income tax you pay minus any child allowances. In Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, your church tax bill amounts to 8% of what you paid in income tax. In other federal states, it's 9%, but it adds up. In 2019, for example, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church collected a record-breaking 6.76 billion euros and 5.95 billion euros in church tax, respectively. And this right for churches to collect a de facto membership fee in the form of a tax dates all the way back to 1919, when the Weimar Republic introduced the measure to counter the financial aftermath of the separation of church and state. And all this money collected is used to help keep parishes, daycare centers, other religious charitable organizations, and their buildings afloat. And as the finance ministry handles the tax for them, because neither church has the necessary infrastructure for such a massive undertaking, it also receives a neat 3% of the total, which added up to 380 million euros in 2016.
That's really interesting because I do feel like it sounds like churches are working with the government. You know, the churches are doing things for the economy, right? So I can see the government standing behind having church tax, you know, enforcing church tax so that churches can keep the economy going a little bit with their facilities and services and things like that. That's very interesting. Because yeah, if if we were required, just because you're part of a certain church or live in a certain area, anything like that, if you were required to pay tithing here, there would be, yeah, that would not go over very well. It's definitely it's an optional thing. There's an obligation to it, but like you don't have to if you don't want to. In certain churches, you will have less maybe access to certain, what am I trying to say? At least in the church that I was in, if you didn't pay your tithing, you weren't able to go to the temple, for example. You weren't worthy enough to go to the temple, which is kind of like a church, but it's a little different. You have to have like a recommend to get in and do those rituals, I guess. And so, yeah, like you could go to church, you could be a Mormon without paying tithing, but there were consequences, I guess, but definitely not connected to law at all. So that is very, very fascinating. But I can see churches over here seem to be very, very business oriented. So I can see that being more a thing. Very fascinating, though. Very different.
But broadly speaking, anyone who's a member of a church listed on your screen collects taxes and is liable to pay the German church tax. There are some exceptions, however. Members of other religious communities, including the Orthodox, Baptist, Salvation Army, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslim, and Buddhist communities are not liable to pay church taxes in Germany. But again, generally speaking, if you are religious and you want to participate in Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish communities and use their facilities, whether that's for a baptism, a wedding, or even a burial, well, they're gonna make sure that you pay your church tax in order to use them. You know, at the end of our videos, I always love to ask the audience a question, and today I actually have a very specific one I wanna ask. Well, it's a two-parter. So the first part is that if you're an American watching this video, specifically if you're a Republican, I would love to hear your thoughts on the idea of paying a church tax. And the reason I'm calling out Republicans in this question is kind of for two reasons. The first is that, generally speaking, the Republican Party aligns itself more closely with Christian values. It's often used as a political platform, whether it's in campaigning or even just in writing a lot of their policies. But at the same time, the Republican Party historically has also been the party of less government and typically advocating for lower taxes. But in the United States, given that we know that the majority of Americans don't actually tithe the 10% that is asked of them in the Bible, church tax actually could be a really interesting way to actually generate more revenue for churches. So I would be really curious to hear what you think about this. Do you like the idea of a church tax, particularly if it could benefit your local church? Or do you not like the idea that it's the government who's collecting it? I don't know, I just think this is a really interesting concept because, again, in the US, we don't have anything even close to this. So I'd be really curious to hear from you as an American on what your thoughts are. But the second question I want to ask is for our German audience.
We'll talk about these.
I've shared numerous times in this video now that religious practices and the differences between the US and Germany has been one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced, because coming from a very rural and conservative part of the US, again, I just didn't realize that our devout religious practices were actually quite unique in the concept of other Western European countries. So from your perspective, as someone on the outside looking in, what do you think of our religious practices? Is this something that you noticed if you've actually visited the United States? Does this actually come up pretty frequently when you think about American stereotypes, when you think about American behaviors, whether that be in everyday community practices or in politics or in media? Anyway, I'm just actually really curious to know what it's like from your perspective looking at my culture and what your thoughts are about this. Anyway, I think we can have a very interesting and productive discussion in the comment section. And you know, of course, religion for a lot of people is a very passionate subject. I think we can keep this very civil and not hurtful or hateful, because
I hope so.
I would love to learn more from other people and hear their thoughts and feelings and expressions. And I think we can do that in a pretty friendly way. But as always, guys,
Nice.
if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from the Black Forest family, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Cheers!
Oh, I thought she meant religion. like I'll see you in church. I'll see you next Sunday. I'm like, wait a second. No, I think they just post every Sunday. That's funny. Okay, interesting. Yeah, if you guys have any comments about either of those questions, definitely, I want to go through their comments as well. It's very, very interesting, especially from either perspective. I feel would be interesting to hear about. Personally, when it comes to implementing some kind of church tax in the United States, so something that is maybe different here, I'm not sure if it's this way in Germany, but something that I'd be hesitant about is that a lot of the funds and maybe not a lot, but I know that a portion of the income from, for specific churches, they use them to kind of promote the word more. They send missionaries out. They, send more pamphlets out. A lot of them are, trying to help other people join their church, which I don't know how intense that is in Germany. I just don't know. I haven't experienced it or anything, but sometimes it can be a little intense here. And so I don't know if I'd want the taxes to go to something like that, because it's just a lot of pressure. It's a lot of kind of uncomfortable situations. When it comes to businesses, facilities, things like that, I don't mind so much, because I understand business is business, and if churches want to help out in that way and have certain services available for people, that's understandable, totally understandable. But I do see church taxes here in the United States being used for proselytion. Is that the word? I can't even remember the word anymore. Proselyting, basically just trying to spread their beliefs to other people, which most of the time is not a big deal, but every once in a while it can be a little bit pushy. So anyway, that's my thought on it. I probably prefer it to not happen. I don't know. Maybe there could be some regulations on that. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. I'm going to go through these comments, I think, right now, just to, I don't know, see what people are saying. But otherwise, I'll thank you for watching this with me. This is a bit of a different topic, and hopefully you guys are okay. Try and keep it respectful in the comments, as always, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you, guys. Bye.